end of the day, we arrive at the end of the day, we sleep and we get up and we're on our way again the next day. And of course, I mean, we're adults, so we're not going to walk around and just be aimless and have no, we have to go to work, we got to go to school, we need to do the things we need to do. But it's not about that. It's about what is your commitment to? What is your intention? What is the driving energy that keeps you going? And because of the way we've constructed reality, particularly in the Western world, we just have everything set up in all these categories and hierarchies and make all these demands on ourselves that really defy what's really going on in our psyches. And that's part of why we get so split and crazy, because we're just going against ourselves all the time. You know, and when you meet somebody like Howard Thurman, who didn't go against himself, he took the time to find out who he was, where he was trying to go. I love, there's a line in one of his essays that talks about, you need to figure out what you're after. What are you after as a person on the earth? You know, what are you trying to do? Why are you doing this stuff? I mean, you just stop and ask yourself, sometimes in the middle of all the hustle and bustle and busyness and goals and work and everything, what's it all about? Mm-hmm. And particularly, I think those questions need to be asked when it comes to trying to do stuff about race and racial healing, because people just get into this work and they just don't know which end is up, and they're working on a whole bunch of internal stuff that's got nothing to do with the people, with liberation for somebody outside, without even knowing what's happening or what they're doing. And actually, people who have been oppressed and marginalized and mistreated, the last thing they need is our neuroses. They already have enough things to worry about, you know? They just don't need our neuroses. And so we need to keep our neuroses in check as best we can, so that when we are with folks, we are trying to really be with them. And it takes some consciousness. It takes some commitment to paying attention and all the stuff that we've been talking about already. Well, anybody else now? I'm going to move on to the poem that I asked you to read, but I don't want to go to that before you, if there's somebody who has another word to share. Well, if something comes up for you that you didn't share now, but before it's over, before the class is over, you'd say, I really can't leave without saying this, then please don't hesitate, because we can always come back to this topic if we need to. So I ask you to reflect on those questions about fear, and what I think, I've been back and forth with myself today about the best course ahead. But I think the best course is, first of all, I want to read the Second Life poem, which I love so much because it just puts things into absolute clear focus, I think, in terms of what we are up against. And then I want to talk about pieces of that poem. And then I want to end our time together with your kind of reflecting upon, what has fear got to do with it? You know, what does fear have to do with the life that you live? And what do you, and how does it manifest itself? And how does it shape your, how has it shaped your way in the world? And how does it continue? Everybody's got something about which they are afraid. And John Lewis said that you have to get over fear. And when you get over fear, nothing else matters. And when I think about him, I think that he may come closest to anybody I've ever heard make that statement, really living the truth of it. Because when you think about the places he went and the things that he did as a young Black man, and getting his head nearly knocked off, and yet continuing to keep on doing what he was doing. As I was watching, I would recommend, if you haven't watched it, I'm sure you heard about it, the documentary on him, Good Trouble, that's on Amazon, what is it, on Amazon Prime right now. And I think it's going to be in theaters, but I don't know how you're going to see it in a theater with the virus. So, but I watched it Saturday night, and it's worth watching. And as I watched how many times he and other people put themselves in harm's way, I just had to ask myself, would I be willing to do that? You know, would I've been willing to get on one of those buses and ride across the South to test out the new civil rights laws, the desegregation of public transportation? And I guess, like, when you're in that age group, you're really kind of stupid. So you do a whole lot of stuff you wouldn't do when you're in your 70s. But I just don't know. I mean, I think I might have. And of course, if my mom heard me say that, she would be jumping up and down telling me all the crazy things I did that she thought were just as dumb as those things. But my looking back on them, they didn't seem so, you know, because she lived in that kind of fear all the time that somebody's going to call and tell her that I was dead or in jail or something from trying to stand up to be a person. But I think all of us have to figure out what is the thing that we have to say. Now, that's the thing I'm the most afraid of, and I'm not going to be afraid anymore. And then at that point, you have a liberation and an energy that comes from that liberation that then propels you into places that you have never been before. You know, because it's like, what is the one thing that's out there? You know, is it death? Is it losing a job? Is it losing your place in the world, people respecting you in a certain way or seeing you in a certain way? What is that thing? And that's the thing that's got to be overcome some kind of way for there to be true liberation. And everybody's got to figure that out for themselves. Nobody's going to be able to tell you, oh, this is what you've got to do. If somebody does that, they just don't know what they're talking about because they don't know what's in you. And it takes us a long enough time to find out ourselves, so nobody else can find out for us. So I want to read this poem. I love this poem so much. And I want to read it to you, and then I want to talk about it a little bit, and I want to hear how it struck you when you've read it the first time, if you've had a chance to read it. And if you didn't have a chance to read it, how it strikes you as you read it now with me or listen to me read it. My uncourageous life doesn't want to go, doesn't want to speak, doesn't want to carry on, wants to make its way through stealth, wants to assume the strange and dubious honor of not being heard. My uncourageous life doesn't want to move, doesn't even want to stir, wants to inhabit a difficult form of stillness, to pull everything into the silence where the throat strains but gives no voice. My uncourageous life wants to stop the whole world and keep it stopped, not only for itself, but for everyone and everything it knows, refusing to stir a single inch until given an exact and final destination. This uncourageous second life wants to win some undeserved lottery so that it can finally bestow a just and final reward upon itself. No, this second life never wants to write or speak or cook or set the table or welcome guests or sit up talking with a stranger who might accidentally set us traveling again. This second life doesn't want to leave the door, doesn't want to take any path that works its own sweet way through mountains, doesn't want to follow the beckoning flow of a distant river, nor meet the chance weather where a path takes us from one discovered world to another. This second life just wants to lie down, close its eyes, and tell God it has a headache. But my other life, my first life, the life I admire and want to follow, looks on and listens with some wonder and even extends a reassuring hand for the one holding back, knowing there can be no real confrontation without the need to turn away and go back away from it all, to have things be different and to close our eyes until they are different. No, this hidden life, this first courageous life, seems to speak from silence and in the language of a knowing, beautiful heartbreak above all. It seems to know well enough it will have to give back everything received in any form, and even sometimes, as it tells the story of the way ahead, laughs out loud in the knowledge. This first life seems sure and steadfast in knowing it will come across the help it needs at every crucial place, and thus continually sharpens my sense of impending revelation. This first courageous life, in fact, has already gone ahead, has nowhere to go except out the door into the clear air of morning, taking me with it. Nothing to do except to breathe while it can, no way to travel but with that familiar pilgrim movement in the body. Nothing to teach except to show me on the long road how we sometimes like to walk alone, open to the silent revelation, and then stop and gather and share everything as dark comes in, telling the story of a day's accidental beauty. And perhaps most intriguingly and most poignantly and most fearfully of all, and at the very end of the long road it has traveled, it wants to take me to a high place from which to see with a view looking back on the way we took to get there, so it can have me understand myself as witness and thus bequeath me the way ahead, so it can teach me how to invent my own disappearance. So it can lie down at the end and show me, even against my will, how to undo myself, how to surpass myself, and how to find a way to die of generosity. I just love that. I just love that. I mean, it just so sums up so much of the dance. And that whole pilgrim piece, you know, that we want to be given an exact and final destination. How much do we long to have the exact and final destination? And how much energy do we invest in trying to make sure that we know the answer to that? You know, what is supremacy about? What is racism about? What are all these isms about? People trying to control the exact and final destination. People trying to structure stuff so that they can have that first uncourageous life not be interfered with. It's rooted and grounded in fear. It's grounded and you know, it's the fear of what's going to happen if I'm not running the show, and how's it going to be if I have to take a chance that that I don't know everything, you know. So as you read this and as you heard me read it and as you've been thinking about all of the stuff we've been talking about and thinking about, what jumps off the page at you that says, aha? You know, Thurman says you're sometimes reading something and you get hit like you've opened up a ammonia bottle. You get hit with the smell of ammonia. So what was there a smell of ammonia in this poem for you as you read it and as you heard me read it now?
I think it's telling me I want the easy way. I want somebody to tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's somewhere. And if you've got to always be naming God as being present to you, then maybe God's not quite as present as you thought. You know, I mean, I don't think anybody ever had any doubt when they sat with Howard Thurman that you were sitting with a holy man. I had 2 times that I was in his presence, and I never had any doubt that I was sitting with a holy man. And he never said much about God. He talked a lot about the journey and the inward and understood everything as being connected to God and about God, but he didn't use that kind of language. And he didn't have to, because of the deep connection that he had. And it just was there. I mean, even when he was being funny, you know, it was just amazing to be in his presence. One of the best gifts that God ever gave to me was allowing me the opportunity to sit in a room and talk to him, because of that just amazing person who lived as fully into who he was put on the earth to be as he possibly could, I think. And he probably would have said he didn't do too well with it. That kind of humility was another piece about him, that he was always ready to be humble. So what other things come to you from these words that David Whyte, by the way, this comes from David Whyte's book called Pilgrim. So I'm so preoccupied with the notion of pilgrim and being a pilgrim, and that this is a journey and not a destination. I have, that works so much better than trying to always be looking for campgrounds. Yes, Jesse. He's invited to preach because he's on the staff, he's associate rector, but he'd been disinvited to preach because they had heard the congregation had 2 sermons about race things, and they knew that this particular friend of mine was going to be preaching about race because that's what he does, and they just didn't think they could stand a 3rd sermon. You know, there was just a little bit too much to have to talk about race and racism and racial healing and social justice for 3 Sundays. Really? Well, let me see. If you thought this was a country club named Christianity, you really did get a misunderstanding, you know? So, but, and he was, I mean, and he's done some really good work, so it was real distressing to him. Yes, Greg?
I just want
activity and messiness when things are growing and changing, and people are responding to the amazing work of the Spirit and making trouble. Like John Lewis says, getting yourself into good trouble, you know, good trouble. And of course, Black and brown people have been just had it beat into our heads that we're supposed to stay out of trouble. That's why he's talking about good trouble. Get into good trouble. He went to jail like 50 something times in his life. Going to jail as a Black person is bad. You're not supposed to do that. You're gonna ruin your name, you know. And often you will if you just go into jail because you've been shoplifting or something. But if you're going to jail for liberation, that's a whole different issue. Other folks, what did you hear and what struck you? Yes, Elizabeth. Because it's a community. It is these are both community members. You know, they live in the same body, and every day all of us have opportunities that offer us a chance to choose courageousness or the lack of courageousness. Are we going to stand up? Are we going to speak up? Are we going to be present? Are we going to hide? You know, some days the choices are more stark than others, but and some days it feels like more of having to make a choice than others. But the basic place the choice has to be made is way down deep at the core of ourselves, which is what Thurman was always talking about. You know, if you just walk around and take a survey in most of our parishes on Sunday morning with people about, if you said way down deep where you really live, who's there, they would think you had completely lost your mind. What do you mean way down deep? Who's there? Because most folks haven't been thinking about that way. You know, way down deep, what am I really about? It's almost like we live in like a kind of robotic You know, we get up, we like the Energizer Bunny. Remember those old commercials when they had those little bunnies, you wind them up and they just go like, you know. And on some days when I catch myself hitting the floor and getting dressed and racing out of the house and getting in the car and going from one thing to another, I stop and say, you're acting like a doggone Energizer Bunny. You're not thinking, you're just going from one thing to another, you know, and maybe you have to do some of that stuff when you're in college and you're trying to write term papers and you're a little crazy anyway, and you don't know which end is up. But after a while, you got to get a grip and start having some direction and some connection to what is the motivating force inside of me that's pushing me down this road. And you need to know the answer to that question. You know, I think too many people are just kind of being dragged along. And Thurman talks about, if you don't get this work done, then every wind that comes will blow you somewhere. And so then you remember seeing those whirlwinds. You know, the whirlwind is just blowing stuff and collecting stuff and just going in a circle and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because it's collecting everything. That's how you end up kind of living. You're like a wind, like a whirlwind. You're in a whirlwind and you're just collecting whatever, and you don't even know what all is there. Because if you ever, when the whirlwind stops, if you go and look at it, there's all kinds of stuff there. You know, sometimes they'll fizzle out close to you and you can look at it and it's collected stuff from everywhere. That's how a whole bunch of people live. They just collect pieces here and there. They collect half-truths and bad narratives, and all of that makes them up. And so then when they hear foolishness, it connects to them because they've been collecting foolishness and they don't have a core. They don't have a place that they can put that stuff to the test. When I hear nonsensical stuff, it doesn't take me but a half a second to know that's not true. And because it totally defies a whole bunch of other things that I have been grounded in. You know, you can't tell me that's true because I know better. Don't tell me all white people are this or that or the other, because I know better. In the first place, I know you don't know all white people. That's the first piece of not true. So when people say, well, you know, Black folks, well, then I want to know what Black folks are you talking about? You know, do you know all Black people? And if so, how did you meet them all? You know, how did you manage that in your short lifetime to meet all of them? So you have to just keep interrogating all of that nonsensical stuff and come into some place to say, let me live out of some place that's grounded and has some sense of sanity about it. Now, I know that people who are totally motivated by fear think that their fearfulness is sanity because they don't have anything to judge that by. So they don't have any way to know what a mess they've made out of themselves. And oftentimes they are not really connected to a community. And we need the community to help us reinforce this journey that I'm talking about. You just really can't just go sit out on a rock and live all by yourself and figure this all out. You need people around you. You need some to bump up against folks and hear stuff and then let it get sorted out in your soul. And God needs to be there, you know, and God is there, you know, like Jung said, called or not called, God is always present. Called or not called, God is present. From Carl Jung, and, you know, people, there are the whole bunch of religious fundamentalists that like to try to make Jung try to explain Jung, which is really funny to me, that they would think they had the capacity to explain Jung, given the limited way they look at the world. But I love it when they try to make him into this kind of, you know, irreverent, somebody who didn't believe in God and all of this. And the thing Jung said about God was, no, he didn't believe in God. He knew God was there. When someone said, do you believe in God? And he said, believe? No, God is. It's like beyond belief. What is beyond belief? What is this? It's in, as Thurman would say, it's in your virus. It's in everything in you. It's in your DNA. It's everything. You know that God is. So that's so far beyond just a little kind of system of belief. And it's kind of funny when people start people who are over here in the little system of belief, trying to explain somebody over here who has encountered God in such a way that they've gotten beyond that, you know? So just kind of being open to being carried wherever you need to be carried is without fear, because we're a pilgrim, and there's not a destination that we're after. It's the journey. It's the journey. And what are we supposed to be doing on the journey? You know, when you get right down to it, do we really believe that if we followed that course, if we just go with what makes sense to our souls, will we be all right? And I think 2/3 of the time we don't think so. Because we've been socialized to believe that if we don't have all these structures and hierarchies and try to organize our lives and know where the destinations are and the road to get there, that we're somehow missing out on everything. Instead of, how do we know what the road will be if we're willing to trust the journey? How do we know? So many wonderful things have shown up on the road that I didn't even know. I like to say there's so many doors that have presented themselves in walls that I didn't know had any doors. You know, you're tooling along and you think you're in a room where there are no doors. And then all of a sudden, the room is full of doors because you were willing to stay in the room. It's pretty good. And after that happens a little bit, you start to trust it. It does take a little while to trust it. Yes, Darren.
I'll let Amy go first because her hand was up. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you.
Amy?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. You keep moving around.
The squares have a mind of their own.
Yeah.
I had never read this poem before. I read it a few days ago or whenever.
Organize our lives around the easiest. The easy, first he says, the easy, and then the easiest of the easy. But that what life requires of us is that we hold to the difficult. And that's one of my favorite lines from Rilke. You know, I love that idea, that holding to the difficult. If you hold to the difficult and see where will it take you. And you know, none of this stuff is like horrible and a terrible way to live, and you have to walk around morbid and looking like you want to put yourself in sackcloth and ashes. It is an intentionality. It is a way that you turn your head, a direction in which you turn your head, the direction of being open and willing to be on a pilgrim's journey and to embrace that kind of life. It becomes a way of being. You know, it's not, and that's what working for racial healing and liberation needs to become a way of being in the world, and not a little exercise or a little project. You know, that's the problem we have, is that we have made it into a bunch of little projects and exercises and we ought to's, instead of, this is my way of being. I am trying to be a liberated person and I want to work for everybody else to be liberated. And it's got to do with me and my liberation, and I understand that. And in the process of doing that work, I'm going to try to make space so other people can be free too. That's so different from, well, we need to do something about race, but I don't really want to because, and you know, what about white privilege? No, it's about, if anybody doesn't have what they need, then something's wrong. If people can't live, if people are being marginalized, if people are being mistreated, that's unacceptable to you because you have turned your intention toward that nobody gets abused here. Everybody is God's child and nobody gets abused. Not, you know, you don't participate in abusing other people because you've turned yourself in that direction. And it's an intentional, it's your intent that comes from deep in your heart. When people say to me, so much of the time, I'm so worried that we'll start on trying to do stuff about racial healing and we won't keep it up. Well, you won't unless you turn your intention, unless you turn yourself, unless you turn your heart in that direction. You're not gonna keep it up if it's just, oh, we gotta do something because the world's in a mess and you feel guilty. If that's why you're doing it, you need to not do it. You need to just not do it. Because what you need to do is the thing that you can be the most honest about. And if you're absolutely just doing something to make yourself feel a little better or look a little better, that's just wasted energy. Absolutely wasted energy. So Linda's saying goodbye. Where are you, Linda? Have you gone already? I guess so. But I'm always wanting to encourage people to be doing the work that helps you to know that you're operating out of some place that's really yours, that belongs to you. So when somebody comes to me and starts trying to tell me bad things about anybody, there's something in me that rebels against that because I don't want to denigrate people. I'm not interested in having to make people into monsters and all those kinds of things. And if I catch myself falling into that trap, then I need to ask myself, what's going on? Because now I've let myself fall into a space that isn't good for me. And it's actually probably not particularly going to bother the other person, but I'm going to be injured by it because I'm allowing something to happen to myself that's going on in me that I need to be paying attention to. And I just think too much of the work around trying to dismantle racism is just rooted in wrong-headedness and wrong intentions. And then it doesn't go anywhere. And it ends up to be more detrimental than it does helpful. Unless people are to come with this kind of openness and willing to be vulnerable and curiosity and willing to ask questions and willingness to listen and willing to listen and hear what is being said without having to change the narrative for people. Those are the skills that folks need to have. So as you go forward from these sessions, trying to think about what you're going to do next and how you're going to structure things, don't forget these conversations, because these conversations need to be at the core of whatever you do. That the bottom line work is opening spaces for people to have their hearts open to each other. And I love Thurman saying that the only place you can find refuge is in another person's heart. You know, how am I willing to let Latinx people, LGBT, white folks, whoever that I might be other to me, how am I willing to open my heart to them? To open my heart so that I don't sit in judgment, I don't even sit in curiosity in that kind of voyeuristic way. I sit in wonder and willingness to be open to who this person is and how this person, connecting to this person, can be gift for me and I can be gift for them. That is so different from, I need to do this, I need to be politically correct, I need to I need to, you know, nobody really wants you to be tolerant of them. Nobody wants toleration. People want acceptance. You know, I mean, I can tolerate a toothache. You know, I tolerate arthritis pain every day. I don't want to tolerate people like I tolerate arthritis pain. You know, you tolerate cold weather or hot weather. And that's not what, you don't have a relationship with what you tolerate, right? There's a difference between toleration and acceptance. So I take issue with that whole body of knowledge that's put out, I think, by the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Tolerance. I want them to teach acceptance. I want to get beyond tolerance. And in the church, we can get beyond tolerance because we already have a foundation that has told us that everybody's created with a part of God in them, and that we're seeing the face of God in every human being that we come in contact with. And so we don't have to just be reductionistic and try to tolerate them. You know, I mean, you can tolerate a lot of stuff, but you don't want it, you really don't want it around. You're just trying to hold your nose and get through it. You know, like right now, we all have to be here talking. Well, we can be tolerant of this. We're not all that accepting of it. We don't expect to have to do this for the rest of our lives. If we did, we'd be a little bit more upset than we are now, you know, but we know that there's an end to this, that someday that we'll be able to sit in rooms together again. At least we have hope of that. And so that helps us to be able to go forward. So just, I want you to, as you end up this session tonight, and let me see what time it is, because time, oh gosh, time just goes like a whirlwind here. I want to move now to the fear part, the questions that I asked you to think about around fear. But as you're thinking about how you're going forward, I do want you to really make sure that there's a healthy dose of, let's ask ourselves, what will it take to build spaces in Colorado where people can be more truly who God put them on the earth to be? You know, what are the hindrances? How is racism affecting that possibility? Because it does, it keeps people from having the opportunity to be who God put them on the earth to be. You know, it takes a lot of energy to have to live marginalized and denigrated, and to live with microaggressions. All that stuff takes a lot of energy. And how can you create spaces where people don't have to live with that? You know, I don't want to live that way. I want to be a free person. So then my job is to make sure that I do everything I can so other people can be free. So what do you need to do? How do you need to restructure things in your diocese and in the Episcopal Church in Colorado? How do you need to restructure? And it's so much, you know, I think God's faithful. If you ask that question with a real intention to hear the answer, I just trust you'll hear some answers. And I think they'll be different from the answers you get when you just think you can just sit down and make up a program. Most of the programs we make up, we probably should have not made them up. We should have, you know, because they're just ridiculous. When you look at a lot of the stuff we do, it's just like, really? Where did we think that was going? And I think we didn't have a clue, and we didn't even think about it. And then it fizzles, and then we say, oh, well, we tried that and that didn't work. And so now we just won't do anything, and we'll just rock along. And then 10 years later, you look up and somebody says, we got to do something. You know, we have an outbreak of people being tired of being oppressed, and then we're all ready to jump on the bandwagon. So I want to encourage y'all not to get caught in that trap. I want to encourage you to build your strategies going forward on the basis of that you are helping yourselves get out of prison. And what does that look like? You know, that's what Thurman says about the poverty, right? You know, he talks about, I can't remember, I've watched so much of his stuff, I don't know where anything is, I just know what he says, I don't know where he said it. But one of the things he talks about is helping yourself get out of prison by sharing with people out of your own abundance. You know, when you give, when you extend yourself, that you're helping to liberate yourself rather than mostly what you're doing is helping yourself even more than you're helping the other person. Even though sometimes we think we're helping the other person more. So let's turn for the next time, the rest of the time we've got together, to actual fears that you can put your finger on, and you know that fear is the thing that stops you. You know, that fear is the thing that makes you not take the next step. You know, when David Whyte says that in that little poem, forget the title of it, but to do the first thing first. To do the first thing first, not the second, not the third, but the first thing. And the first thing is naming the fear that keeps you from doing the first thing. And that's why we go to the second or the third or the fourth thing, because the first thing we don't want to do. And he says that, do the first thing first, not the second, not the third, the first thing, the thing you don't want to do. You know, so what is the thing you don't want to do the most? You know, what is the fear? And how does it keep you, how does it hold you hostage? Yes, Weston.
I think my biggest fear that keeps me from action is failure.